Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Guild Arches video, where today I'm going to be completing the game with the Breloom and Parasect lines. And both these Pokemon are very similar in that they get the best status effect move in the game, which is Spore, a 100% accurate sleep move, as well as having the Effect Spore ability. They also have a 4 times weakness to flying, though Parasect is also 4 times weak to fire as well. So I do think that this run is going to be very interesting. However, it might have a lot of places where they get stuck. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to their stats and move pool. Paras has 35 HP, 70 attack, 55 defense, 45 special attack, 55 special defense, and 25 speed, making it a fairly strong Pokemon, especially in the early game. But unfortunately, with its really low speed and HP stats, I expect it to struggle a bit, especially in the early game. And moving on to its moves, it gets access to mostly normal and grass type moves, though it can get Aerial Ace if I wanted to go for it, and I guess Leech Life early on could be okay. But the biggest issue with this line is the fact that it is a physical attacker that really only gets normal type moves to make use of it. Now moving on over to Shroomish, and it has 60 HP, 40 attack, 60 defense, 40 special attack, 60 special defense, and 35 speed, making it very slow as well. However, it is much more defensive. Even though it's not going to be dealing as much damage, I think it's going to be a bit more consistent in surviving battles. And since it is a mono grass type, it doesn't have nearly as many weaknesses as Paras does. Now moving over to its moves, and Shroomish is a bit of a strange case because when it evolves it gets access to all these fighting type moves. However, if you keep it a Shroomish, it's kind of a different Pokemon altogether. And unfortunately, evolving into Breloom doesn't allow me to get the move Spore. However, I think the drawback of using a Shroomish up until level 54 is going to be way worse than evolving and just not bothering with Spore altogether, because the fighting type moves are going to be very nice, as well as solid normal type and grass type moves. Though when it evolves into Breloom, it's really not going to want to use those grass type moves because it is a much stronger physical attacker. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Shroomish in particular, which has a careful nature, raising its special defense but lowering its special attack, which in the short term kind of hurts. However, I think in the long term is going to be very helpful. It gets the Effect Spore ability that 10% of the time it can either poison, sleep, or paralyze the opponent whenever they make contact with me. And it gets Absorb, Tackle, Stun Spore, and Leech Seed by level 10. Now moving on to our Paras, which has a rash nature, which just so happens to be the exact opposite of Shroomish's, raising special attack but lowering special defense, which does give Paras at least a bit of something to do if I want to use those grass type moves. It too gets the Effect Spore ability, and it only starts with Scratch and Stun Spore by level 10. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the run, where the first thing I'm going to do is get the Bullet Seed TM, and I'm going to teach it to Paras, and that's because in the long run, Paras might actually need it more than Shroomish will. Anyway, moving into the battle against the Old Man, and this arrow is actually a huge threat because it has both Ice and Fire Punch, and that's the reason I have Teddiursa out, is because if it decided to use Fire Punch against the Paras, it would have gone down in a single hit. Also, another Shroomish. Hello, other Shroomish. Now with the Abragon, I swap into Paras, and I go for Absorb into Horsey to start getting a little bit of health back. But at the same time, it's also looking to be a two-shot. Shroomish hits me with Tackle and gets affected by Effect Spore, which is very nice. And I think between the 3 different options, Poison is definitely the best in this instance because this is going to take quite a few hits to actually take the Shroomish down. But eventually, Poison finishes the job and we beat the Old Man on the first attempt. Now at level 16, Shroomish gets Mega Drain, which I teach over Absorb because it's just twice as strong. And then I run into yet another Shroomish, which... Hello, other Shroomish. Goodbye, other Shroomish. And then I decide to fight the blue Power Ranger today, and that's because I do super effective damage against all of his Pokemon. In fact, Mega Drain takes down Horsey in a single hit, then out comes his Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Spheal. And even though Paras isn't all that great of a special attacker, it is still decent enough to nearly take Spheal down to half health. So I am able to finish it off on the following turn. And all that's left is the Goldeen, which with the extra poison damage should guarantee that it goes down this turn. Mega Drain gets a crit and finishes it off. Okay, well anyway, inside the Cypher base at level 22, Shroomish gets Headbutt, which I decide to teach over Tackle. And then at level 19, Paras gets Leech Life, which isn't all that great, but I haven't used Poison Powder a single time, so I teach it over that. And then at level 23, Shroomish evolves into Breloom. which is going to be a huge increase in stats, as well as a change in type, and to celebrate that, it gets the move Mach Punch, which I decided to teach over Spore. Breloom has 60 HP, 130 attack, 80 defense, 60 special attack, 60 special defense, and 70 speed, and now is a grass fighting type. So it is now fairly quick, as well as having a huge attack stat, so I know for a fact it's going to take down a lot of things in a single hit. However, getting that fighting type also gives it a lot of extra weaknesses that it didn't previously have, and with its bulk not being all that great, there are going to be instances where it doesn't get a KO, or I have to focus on a different Pokemon and it'll go down. But let's get to that later, because first we run into another Shroomish, a Shadow Shroomish, which I could have taken but decided not to. And then we go into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Beautifly and a Love Disc. And of course this is going to be no problem at all. I set up Leech Seed on Love Disc just so Breloom has consistent healing, because the Gust from Beautifly is going to be doing a ton of damage, and I'm not sure if I can take it down right away. However, that Headbutt convinces me that this fight is going to be no problem whatsoever. Paris goes for Scratch, dealing a little bit of chip damage to Roselia, though I don't think it was necessary at all because Headbutt takes it down in a single hit too. And unfortunately, Paris just feels a little outclassed in this fight, because it doesn't really add much. That little bit of chip damage to Delcatty could have been necessary, but I think Mach Punch would have been strong enough without it, and all that's left is the Love Disc, which is definitely going to go down in a single hit. I decided to go for Mega Drain just to heal up, though this wasn't necessary, and we beat Lavrina on the first attempt. Now, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale Darkness video without the obligatory Meowbee. Kinda spooky, right? Anyway, after that, we now evolve our Paris into Parasect, and while it doesn't have the same outrageous change the other one does, but it does have 60 HP, 95 attack, 80 defense, 60 special attack, 80 special defense, and 30 speed. And I find it kind of interesting that these two kind of swap roles. Shroomish in the beginning is very defensive, and when it evolves becomes offensive, whereas Paris was much more offensive and becomes a bit more defensive when it evolves into Parasect. So that's kind of neat. Unfortunately, that 30 base speed is going to be a huge issue for it, but hopefully once I get Spore, I can counteract it a bit. Anyway, at the Railgun Tower, I pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and I'm going to teach Hidden Power to Parasect right away, which happens to be Hidden Power Water, which usually wouldn't be the best Hidden Power type to get, but because of Parasect's unique typing, being 4 times weak to fire, I do think that water is going to be very helpful for it. So I teach that over Leech Life, and finally at level 27, Parasect gets the move Spore, which of course I'm going to teach over Stun Spore, and then I move on to the Tutor Lady and I pick up the move Body Slam. And while I could teach this to Breloom because of its higher attack stat, it already has Headbutt, which is pretty good, so I teach it to Parasect, and I'm incredibly glad I did, because this might be the greatest animation in the game. They definitely went above and beyond for this one, because Body Slam turns into a flying saucer type motion in order to hit your opponent. Definitely my favorite animation I've seen in the game thus far. And we move on to Snaddle. He leads with a Quagsire and a Lantern, and to my surprise, Quagsire doesn't go down to a single Mega Drain. In fact, it survives with a pretty decent amount of health left. I am able to get a Spore off on Lantern, so it's not going to be a threat for quite a while. So I take down the Quagsire, and then out comes his Shadow Lunatone. I go for Hidden Power Water into it, dealing a decent amount of damage, but unfortunately I'm not quite able to finish it off with a Mach Punch, so it does set up Shadow Sky. So I am going to be taking chip damage. Another Hidden Power finishes it off, and then out comes Cast Form. The Fruity Pebbles rain down, and I do think that Cast Form's not going to be a threat at all. I go for Mach Punch into it, and it goes down in a single hit like I expected, and then out comes Metang. And I've been very lucky so far because Lantern hasn't woken up yet, though I'm not sure how much damage it could actually do because it would just be using Flail or Facade. Go for Headbutt, starting to take down the Lantern, and it actually got a full 5-turn sleep, and all that's left is the Metang. So after a round of Fruity Pebbles, I go for Mach Punch and a Hidden Power Water. Mach Punch takes it down to half health, and Hidden Power gets a crit and takes it down. Very easy Snaddle. We move on to the ONBS building, where I forgot there's a Shroomish sitting on the desk. Hello, the Shroomish. At level 36, Breloom gets Sky Uppercut, an 85% accurate move that is very powerful, which I'm going to teach over Leech Seed. And then I go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. Nuzleaf is always going to go for Fake Out on the first turn, but luckily because these are two grass types, Electrode is only going to ever go for Sonic Boom, so it's not really a threat in this fight. Nuzleaf goes down to a single Mach Punch, and then he sends out Vileplume, go for Body Slam into it, luckily getting a paralysis and nearly taking it down to half health. I go for Headbutt to finish it off, and I go for Hidden Power Water to start taking down the Electrode, and that's because I don't want to touch Electrode with a physical move, because it has the static ability, which if either of my Pokemon were paralyzed, could be quite detrimental. So I decide to take it slow and chip the Electrode down with the Hidden Power Waters, and with my Breloom at 20 HP, I actually got very lucky that Electrode didn't decide to target it. And with the Electrode and Whiscash down, all that's left is the Skarmory, which might be his biggest threat on his team. On top of having the move Aerial Ace, doing 4 times damage to both my Pokemon, it is also just very physically defensive, so even a Sky Uppercut from Breloom only takes it down to half. So I do have to put it to sleep and take it down with Hidden Powers to finish it off. But with that, we move on to the pyramid, where I run into another Paris. Goodbye, other Paris. Now at the top of the pyramid, I go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and the Lairon's always going to go for Protect on the first turn, so I go for Sky Uppercut into the Celio, taking it down because it is part Ice type. Go for Body Slam into Slowking, dealing a little bit of damage, but also paralyzing, which is very nice. Unfortunately, Headbutt doesn't finish the job, but I did decide to put Lairon to sleep anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I finished it off on the following turn, and now I can put the incoming Ursaring to sleep. And because Lairon has been asleep for a bit longer, I'm going to go ahead and take it down, even though it's probably not the bigger threat between these two. So it goes down in a single hit, and then out comes Primeape. I go for Spore into it, but I forget that it has Vital Spirit, preventing it from falling asleep, so I take it down with a Sky Uppercut crit. I'm not sure if that was necessary. And then he sends out his final Shadow Pokemon, which is a Hypno. Body Slam does a decent amount of damage to it. Headbutt isn't quite enough to finish it off, and it hits both of us with Shadow Down, lowering our defenses by 2 stages. As long as the Ursaring doesn't wake up, which it doesn't, and I don't miss a Sky Uppercut, which I don't, I get past the fight pretty easily. So now moving into the last area of the game, and while everything has been smooth sailing so far, the last area of the game is always much more difficult. So hopefully I'm able to get through it pretty easily. The first fight is a rematch against Silverina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis. I go for Sky Uppercut into Gorbis. Not quite a one-shot, and unfortunately Breloom gets attracted. I put the Gardevoir to sleep, and Gorbis hits an Ice Beam, freezing Breloom. So unless I thought quickly, this is going to be more than likely a first loss. Gorbis goes down, and then out comes Roselia. And because the Gardevoir is still asleep, I decide to go ahead and take down the Roselia, which I'm actually able to do in a single Body Slam. Then she sends out her Shadow Farfetch. Now this thing is very dangerous because it likes to use Shadow Panic. However, there is a bit of conflicting interest now that Breloom has defrosted, and that's because I really want to get rid of the attract that's on Breloom. And so I want to take down the Gardevoir. However, the Farfetch has now just confused both of us, which could end up becoming a loss. It sets up Shadow Sky, so now I'm taking chip damage on top of it. But hopefully with enough luck, I'll be able to get through. Headbutt finishes off Gardevoir, so now I'm no longer attracted. Out comes her Shadow Altaria, her last Pokemon. Parasect hits itself in Fusion. Shadow Break takes down Breloom. But this isn't quite lost yet. Shadow Rave does an incredible amount of damage to Parasect. I finish off the Farfetch'd, but unfortunately I don't think there's any way to outspeed the Altaria, and Parasect goes down. Now with that being a very close try victory, with quite a bit of bad luck, this should be a very easy second try victory, right? Well, her 2 leads are actually a fairly decent counter against my Pokemon. Breloom unfortunately can't take either of them down in a single hit, which leaves them open to being attracted, and unfortunately both of them also go down to just a couple of Ice-type moves, which unfortunately brings us to now attempt number 5. And the first thing I need to do is win the 50-50. Luckily I do. Breloom gets attracted, and Parasect can finish off the Gardevoir, bringing out Roselia. And I need to get rid of both of these. And I already know Body Slam takes down Roselia, but now at level 45, Sky Uppercut actually has a small chance to take down Gorbis. No, unfortunately Roselia decides to attract Parasect, so it's not able to take it down this turn. But Breloom is able to attack, taking down the Farfetch'd in a single hit, bringing out her Shadow Altaria once again. And Roselia really can't do anything from this point on. I'm actually surprised it didn't go for another attract. Body Slam takes it down, and then all that's left is that Shadow Altaria, which gets a flinch. I put it to sleep, and now this battle is over. All it takes is one more headbutt with a crit to finish it off. Now at level 51, Parasect gets the move Giga Drain, which I can finally replace Bullet Seed with, and then I pick up the Shadow Hitmonlee for the Black Belt item to raise fighting type damage by 10% before going into the battle against Snaddle. This time he leads with a Quagsire and a Matang, and I go for Sky Uppercut to take down Matang in a single hit, which brings out his Scizor, and I go for Giga Drain, which takes down Quagsire as well, bringing out his first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Solrock. Now I decide to split up the damage. I go for Giga Drain into the Solrock, and I go for Sky Uppercut into Scizor. Unfortunately, Scizor survives, taking Parasect down in a single hit with a critical Aerial Ace. Go for Sky Uppercut to finish off the Solrock, then out comes Castform, and another critical hit Aerial Ace takes down Breloom. So that is just very unfortunate, which brings us now to attempt number 3, because as it turns out, Scizor is a menace. Now I decide to put Quagsire to sleep, and that's because I want to have it around, that way I don't have to take down the Shadow Solrock, and I can focus all my attention on the Scizor, and even without a crit, it still does an insane amount of damage to Parasect. Then out comes the Solrock, and I go for Sky Uppercut into it, luckily getting a crit, because as it turns out, Solrock can actually survive on a sliver of HP at this level, so it's not a guaranteed one-shot, as I found out in the second attempt. Now, with Castform and Starmie out, I decide to focus on the Starmie because it is going to be doing quite a bit more damage than the Castform will. At least that's what I thought, because Castform did over half to Parasect in a single turn. But Sky Uppercut finishes it off, and we beat Snaddle on the third attempt. Now moving on to Ardos, he leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam. And unfortunately, neither of my Pokemon are faster than either of his Pokemon, and Alakazam's Fire Punch takes Parasect down to 1 HP. Now luckily it is able to get off a Spore, but Fruity Pebbles are going to finish it off. And while Breloom is very strong, Sky Uppercut takes down Kingdra in a single hit. Heracross is also very tanky and is part bug type, so I am going to have to use Headbutt against it to take it down, and that only does half. And Swallow is just about to outspeed me, so I decide to go for Mach Punch to see how much that'll do, and Swallow survives at a half HP as well, and Breloom goes down. Okay, well with that loss I decide to teach Parasect Protect, and I go back into the battle once again. However, this is now attempt number 5, and really this battle starts off very poorly for these two, because Alakazam is using either Psychic or Fire Punch, which nearly one-shots both of my Pokemon, and Swallow is always setting up Shadow Sky, so even when I put it to sleep, it's still doing chip damage. Now on this attempt, I go for Sky Uppercut, which I know takes down Kingdra, and then out comes the Heracross, and because Parasect is still alive, I can put it to sleep. That way I can take it down in a couple of turns. Unfortunately, Breloom is only one turn away from going down, so I will need to make the most of him. I decide to take down the Swallow this turn, bringing out the Electabuzz, and I go for Body Slam into Electabuzz, taking it down in a single hit with a crit, but I don't think it was a one-shot otherwise. And now all that's left is Parasect to finish the fight. I go for Body Slam into the Heracross to take it down. Hopefully Snorlax misses. It doesn't, and it deals a ton of damage to Parasect. But as long as it doesn't hit again, I'm fine. Go for another Body Slam to finish off Heracross. And it misses. And I know I outspeed, so I can put it to sleep. And now all that's left is to hope for decent sleep luck or a miss. So I go for Body Slam, taking it down to about a third of its HP. It's still asleep, and I'm able to finish it off on the following turn. So with Ardos defeated, we now move on to Gorgon once again, who leads with a Slowking and a Nurturing. And I go for Headbutt into the Slowking right away, taking it down to half, and Giga Drain finishes it off. After that comes out Aggron, and I go for Sky Uppercut into it because it is 4 times weak to fighting, and then out comes Walrein, and I go for Giga Drain, dealing quite a bit of damage to it, taking it down below half. I then go for Mach Punch and Giga Drain to finish off the Walrein and start dealing damage to his first Shadow Pokemon, Shadow Poliwrath, and Giga Drain is dealing quite a bit of damage to it as well. So I should be able to finish off this following turn, go for Sky Uppercut to take down the Ursaring, and then he sends out his Shadow Mr. Mime, Shadow Sky comes out from Poliwrath, Giga Drain finishes off the Poliwrath, and then all that's left is that Mr. Mime, which, even though it does resist my fighting type moves, Headbutt should be enough to take it down. I go for it, and it actually survives with a bit of HP left. Luckily, it gets flinched, and I finish it off with a Body Slam. Now moving on, and we run into another Breloom. Hello, other Breloom. Goodbye, other Breloom. Anyway, now into the battle against Eldest. He leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and unfortunately this pairing is also quite dangerous. Because Manectric has the static ability, I might get paralyzed every time I attack it with a physical move, and unfortunately that's basically necessary to get anywhere in this fight. So I risk it. I'm able to take it down in a single hit with Sky Uppercut, then out comes Salamence, which I put to sleep immediately. Ninjask is going to be using Aerial Ace, which is doing a ton of damage. And unfortunately, because Salamence does have the Intimidate ability, my attack is dropped, so I am doing a lot less damage with my Headbutts. But it is my best move because it is part flying. So Headbutt takes it down to nearly half, Body Slam takes it down below, and I need to hopefully have Ninjask not wake up this turn. But it does. It just goes for Protect though. Go for Headbutt, nearly finishing it off, and Body Slam does the trick. Then out comes Flygon. Fruity Pebbles rain down, taking the Breloom down to 2 HP. I go for Sky Uppercut into Flygon, but unfortunately, it misses, which hasn't happened too often, but Breloom goes down because of it. I go for Spore into Ninjask to put it back to sleep, but at this point there's nothing left to do, and Flygon finishes off Parasect with another Flamethrower. So I go back into the battle again, this time with a change of plans. I decide to equip Breloom with the White Herb item, but unfortunately without the Black Belt, it's not able to take down Manectric in a single hit, which is a bit unfortunate. I am able to finish it off on the following turn with a Mega Drain, and then use Spore to hit the Salamence, but now I'm going into it quite a bit damaged because of the Ninjask attacking this turn. But with the Salamence asleep, and with my attack not being lowered, I should be dealing a lot more damage. So I go for Headbutt just as I did before, and Body Slam, and Headbutt is doing about a third, which isn't nearly as much damage as I thought it'd be dealing. And unfortunately, I decide to go for Protect on this turn because I didn't want Parasect to go down, but the Ninjask decides to attack Breloom, taking it down to 2 HP, and Breloom goes down to the Fruity Pebbles, leaving Parasect all by itself once again. I go for Protect in vain, and I lose. So now on attempt number 5, and I go back into the battle again, now a few levels higher, and I'm able to take down the Manectric in a single Sky Uppercut now, and Spore now hits Salamence, putting it to sleep on the first turn. Fruity Pebbles rain down because unfortunately I still don't outspeed the Manectric. I go for Headbutt into Salamence, and unfortunately I do have to take an Aerial Ace before I can put the Ninjask to sleep. But once it is asleep, I can hopefully deal with the other Pokemon that matter first before I come back around to it. Now Salamence still might not be a one-shot from this range, but a second critical hit Headbutt will take it down. Then out comes Flygon. I go for Spore into it, putting it to sleep. So now I won't be hit by its flamethrowers that deal a ton of damage. However, I do think that at this point Ninjask is the bigger threat because it is such a fast Pokemon and it is dealing quite a bit of damage, so I take it down. And then out comes the Shadow Marowak, which goes down to a single Giga Drain, bringing out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Lapras. Now luckily I do deal super effective damage to it with both of my Pokemon, so it shouldn't be a threat as long as I am able to outspeed. Sky Uppercut takes it down in a single hit. Flygon wakes up, hitting Flamethrower into Breloom, taking it down, but luckily me being a bit cautious with Lapras actually ended up working out because Flygon is now put to sleep and can't deal that 4 times effective Flamethrower into Parasect, and so I'm able to slowly take it down with Body Slams and beat Eldest on the 5th attempt. Now moving on to the big box legendary Shovelwalkia, and I go for Headbutt and Spore into it. Luckily it just decides to go for Shadow Down, so I am going to be able to put it to sleep. However, my Headbutts are doing almost no damage to it. I go for Body Slam as well, which does take it down to half health, but it is going to take a full another turn. Luckily it didn't wake up, and so I'm able to get through this battle unscathed. Now moving on to the battle against the final boss Greevil, and he leads with a Moltres and Rhydon. I go for Headbutt into Moltres. This is just more or less to check how much damage I'm doing. Unfortunately, Moltres gets a critical hit with Shadow Fire, taking Breloom down in a single hit. I go for Giga Drain to take down the Rhydon in a single hit, and then out comes the Shadow Executor. Shadow Fire is dealing half damage to Parasect though, and an unfortunate burn will end this first attempt fairly quickly, because I can't really do anything without physical attacking moves. So unfortunately Parasect goes down, and we move on to the second attempt. Maybe I can get a little bit more information with this one. I go for Headbutt, getting a crit onto Moltres, doing a lot more damage, and I go for Spore into it just to guarantee it's not going to be a threat for a while. But Rhydon decides to hit a Shadow End, taking Parasect down. Breloom is able to finish off Rhydon from half health with Mega Drain, though I'm not sure if he could do it from full. Out comes the Executor once again, and then I finish off the Moltres, bringing out his Tauros. Now unfortunately this does have the Intimidate ability, so it is going to lower my attack. So I'm not sure if Sky Uppercut is still going to one-shot, but it misses, so I won't even get to see this attempt. And unfortunately I go down very quickly after. So with that, we go ahead and move on to our final attempt, which is actually only attempt number 4. See, I go for Headbutt, getting the crit on Moltres. Now I am a few levels higher as well. Go for Spore to put it to sleep. Rhydon misses a Shadow End, and I decide to go ahead and take down the Moltres anyway. And then out comes the Executor. And while I could take down the Rhydon this turn, I decide to put it to sleep because it is a potential healing later in the fight with either Mega Drain or Gig Drain. So I decide to take down the Executor, which luckily with a crit Body Slam finishes it off. Now, unlike the Eldest fight, I am still using the Black Belt in this attempt, which is luckily enough to take down the Tauros. But the reason I'm using the Black Belt is because I wasn't actually expecting to win on this attempt. And had I been using the White Herb, that would have been destroyed every single time, so I would have had to reload the save and thus never get any experience. So this was all just training to make it so that my final attempts were better, but oddly enough, this is the final attempt. So I go for Spore into the Rhydon because it woke up and took down Breloom, and even though it doesn't really look like I should win, I do. Go for Body Slam, nearly taking down Articuno. Luckily they both stay asleep, and I go for another Body Slam to finish off Articuno, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Zapdos. And all I need to do is put it to sleep and get kinda lucky, because its Shadow Bolts are doing a ton of damage, and there's no way for me to outspeed unless I get a lucky paralysis on Body Slam, and Rhydon didn't heal me as much as I thought it would, so I think if I get hit by a Shadow Bolt at this range, I'm going to be taken down, so I do need to get a bit lucky on sleep. I decided to go for Protect on this turn, which was unfortunate because the following turn it wakes up, takes me down to 19, but Spore puts it back to sleep, and once again, I just need luck. Body Slam takes it down to low yellow, and another one takes it down to red, and as long as it doesn't wake up this turn... Okay, maybe I might need one more turn. That's very unfortunate that Body Slam ran out of PP, but I finished it off with Giga Drain, and we beat Greevil. So despite a lucky victory against Greevil, how well did these two actually do? Well, they beat the game at a time of 11 hours, 37 minutes, and 54 seconds, with Breloom at level 58 and Parasect at level 62, and with 20 feints throughout the game, 17 of those to bosses, and only 3 of those to random trainers. And I think that this pairing is actually really good throughout a majority of the game. It didn't lose a single time to any of the bosses leading up to Cidardark Isle. Unfortunately, the last area of the game is a complete different story. Lavrina is very luck dependent because Parasect is extremely slow, and unfortunately Breloom at the level that I showed up at wasn't able to one-shot either of her 2 leads. Now, it did eventually get strong enough to take down Gorbis, however that did take a couple levels and a bit of extra time. Snaddle took a couple of attempts, but that's mostly due to me not thinking Scizor was going to be nearly as threatening as it was. Ardos is a huge threat because his 2 leads are very fast, and Eldest kind of has a similar issue. Luckily Ninjask is going for Protect every other turn though, but Salamence is still a huge threat because it doesn't take a lot of damage from my physical moves, even with the White Herb resetting the attack drop. And then Greevil's a bit of a mixed bag. I'm not exactly sure how to feel about it because on one hand I got very lucky in the fight, but on the other hand Spore is 100% accurate, so is it really all that lucky? Anyway, with that being said, they find themselves in the B+ tier, and I think that's quite fitting because while they do pretty good throughout most of the game, their early game is a little slow, their mid game is actually really solid, and then their late game is just a bit inconsistent because of their weaknesses, both in typing, stats, and their moves. But anyway, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!